I know I'm no Olivier, but if he fought Sugar Ray, he would say, "That thing ain't the ring, it's the play." So give me a stage where that bull can rage. And though I can fight, I'd much rather recite. That's entertainment. That's entertainment.
Now, the creators of the biggest smash hit of all time bring you the next episode in the Star Wars saga, The Empire Strikes Back.
Did you know that Martin Scorsese wasn't in line to direct Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back?
Was he?
No, that's not true at all.
Welcome to our retrospective on It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Yep, all 8 of them.
Yes, that tremendous series.
But for everyone else, hello. Welcome to the Waffle Press Retrospective. I'm your host, Diego Crespo. With me as always, Matt Gringo. Matt, how you doing? You want to talk about it?
Fuck everyone.
Okay.
Fuck you.
Yeah, you know what? I've heard that before. That's okay.
Fuck Star Wars.
It's kind of a bummer of an opening we're doing here for this whole thing, but
yeah, well, fuck it. I'm in a bad mood. I'm fucking ready to take down Hollywood. Yeah, we're here to talk about Empire Strikes Back.
One of the best movies ever made. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think Empire voted it the best film ever made.
There's a good argument there. Sometimes people come up with oh, this is the best movie ever. And sometimes I kind of scratch my head, if I'm being honest, oh, that's the one. It's like the Academy Awards thing, where it's that one, that's the declarative best picture of the year. Oh, sure, I guess, if you watch 5 movies.
Well, rarely does the best picture actually win. We got lucky with the Moonlight thing last year, but that was very lucky.
Empire Strikes Back is not directed by George Lucas. They brought in Irvin Kershner, who I'm sure you're familiar with his work, Matthew.
Oh, yeah. I actually am.
Okay, good. I don't think I've actually seen anything else he's done.
Well, I mean, he did RoboCop 2.
Yeah.
This is after, he did RoboCop 2. He did Never Say Never Again, which was the unofficial James Bond movie that brought Sean Connery back. He did a really wacky movie called The Eyes of Laura Mars, which is a weird Hitchcockian thriller, but involving psychic powers, and it's written by John Carpenter. Yeah, so Lucas went to a couple seminars taught by that guy, by Irvin Kershner, and then when it was time to make the next Star Wars, he's like, hey, why don't you make it? Well, at first he said no, and then eventually he came around and decided, yeah, I'll do it. So thanks, Irvin Kershner.
Yeah, because it turned out pretty well.
Well, let's just say, all right, right after, so Star Wars ends, and they decide, it made more money than God, so we definitely have to have a sequel. But George Lucas, from the beginning, had always wanted this to be a franchise series. He did not initially want A New Hope to be the middle story. That was just going to be the beginning. It was like that. There's many versions where it says Episode 1 on a lot of drafts of Star Wars. It was supposed to be the adventures of Luke Skywalker. And because he felt that before Star Wars was released, he thought it was going to be a disaster. So he felt if he ever was going to do a sequel, he would have to do it really low budget. So he went to Alan Dean Foster, is that it?
Yeah.
Do you know the name?
Yeah, that's the name.
Alan Dean Foster, and had him write I don't know if he wrote a script first or if it started as a novelization that would have been a low-budget sequel involving Luke and Leia looking for the Kyber crystals and Darth Vader showing up, and it's very specifically built around the sets and models he was going to have after the movie tanked. And Harrison Ford wasn't going to be in it because he was the only actor who didn't sign on for multiple movies. So there's no Han Solo. And this, eventually, when Star Wars ended up being a massive hit, they just turned this proposed sequel into a novelization called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which I think is the first official entry in the expanded universe of Star Wars. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
All right. As you can imagine, so Lucas makes more money than God off the first Star Wars, so now he feels he can do whatever he wants. So he wants to do a huge sequel now. And he brings on a woman by the name of Lee Brackett, who was also known as the Queen of the Space Opera. She wrote tons of space opera books back in like the 50s and 60s and was an acclaimed Hollywood screenwriter. And she wrote the first draft of Empire and then died.
Oh.
Some people give her credit for the whole I am your father twist of Empire, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The only draft of hers that's out there, because George Lucas hasn't released any of the notes from the supposed meetings they had, the only draft out there, not only is Darth Vader not Luke's father, Luke meets the ghost of his father. And his ghost has like a ghost duel with Obi-Wan to try and teach Luke how to fight. And this is also the script where Lando Calrissian would have been a clone, we would have seen Darth Vader's lava castle with gargoyles.
Oh, fuck yeah. I love that idea so much.
That's something I wish we could have seen.
Yeah.
In this movie, at least.
Mm-hmm.
But I get it. It doesn't fit with what ended up happening. An idea that was definitely Lee Brackett's was that Luke has a sister on the other side of the galaxy who I believe had a name in the script that I don't remember. And it was not Leia. But that idea was introduced in Lee Brackett's script.
It's out there, right?
Oh, yes. It's something with an N. I can't remember.
It's going to kill me now that I didn't even get that name down. Fuck.
Yeah, well, I had it written down. Now I can't find it in my mountain of notes. Because I wrote way too fucking much. But I think something weird happened between Star Wars and Empire. Because, all right, so, remember the toys took off and there was, the famous empty box campaign where they couldn't make enough toys in time for Christmas. So you literally got kids a pamphlet that just said, we will deliver the toys on this date. So kids got empty boxes for Christmas, but it was a guarantee that you would get, like, the whole box of Star Wars toys. If you started buying these collections, they included a completely new character named Boba Fett. Boba Fett was first introduced as a toy. Although that might not be true. They came up with this marketing gimmick where there would be these wanted posters for, Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewbacca, like wanted. And the implication was that bounty hunters were after them. And I believe the original version of Empire was going to play heavy on these bounty hunters. That's why there's like that whole scene where we meet Boba Fett, and there's like a whole bunch of bounty hunters who have no lines and do nothing. So I think the original film was going to be about them. And Boba Fett was going to be a key antagonist. That
would have been pretty cool. Because as it stands in the movie, like, they're not really that necessary. But we'll get to that when we talk about the movie.
It's a cool little moment to see all those different characters there, but they don't do anything.
Yeah.
And you only know of their coolness if you've read the expanded universe. Well, from what I understand, what happened was Boba Fett was going to be the main antagonist of this film. Then, over the course of time, they decided to shift focus to Darth Vader being the main antagonist, and then the Boba Fett stuff was going to be in the sequel. The whole sequel was originally going to center around bounty hunters before Return of the Jedi was written. Because, again, all right, I skipped over one point I want to make, which is that after the massive success of Star Wars, Lucas and his producer, Gary Kurtz, decided to map out what they wanted the franchise to be. And they came up with 9 films that they wanted to do. Yeah. At least 9. And some of the ideas were, and so that's where they came up, they want to do prequels. And one of the ideas that were thrown around was either using the prequels to show the origin of the Jedi Order or to tell the story of a young Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then there were going to be sequels, but there was never this idea that this was going to be a trilogy. Like, that was never set in stone. They wanted to do a bunch of films in a row. So you would have, Empire Strikes Back, and then the next one would be about rescuing Han Solo, and then the one after that would have been about looking for Luke's sister. And then the one after that would have been about defeating Darth Vader, and then the one after that would have been... The Emperor wasn't going to show up until the 9th film. And Darth Vader was probably going to get defeated before that, even. And there's all sorts of talk about how there were ideas for different Sith characters to appear. Because Darth Vader in all the promotional materials is referred to as the Dark Lord of the Sith, which implies that he kind of rules something, or that he has some type of followers and he isn't just, a creepy general.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that ended up happening. Now, why is that?
I don't have an answer other than that's not the direction the story took.
No, it's because the production of Empire Strikes Back was a fucking disaster. They don't talk about it as much, but its budget doubled. And that's not a good thing to happen. They went over budget by, they doubled the amount they intended to spend on it, and they almost had their loan pulled. Because the bank said if you go over budget, we pull your loan, even if you're producing the sequel to the most successful film ever made. And this was at a time when a lot of big Hollywood movies were flopping, so everyone was kind of getting scared. And Lucas was doing this on the independent level, remember? Mm-hmm. He produced this outside of the studio. This was not a studio-mandated film. He allowed 20th Century Fox to release it, and they were going to get money from, distributing it, but they weren't going to get the lion's share of the money, and they weren't going to produce it. And that caused some tension at 20th Century Fox. Until when Lucas did go over budget, he had to kind of go with his head down and ask them for more money, and Lucas ended up having to give up a lot of the profits of Empire for just so the studio would pay to finish the movie. So Lucas ends up making less money off of Empire than he did off of Star Wars, even though I believe Empire made more than Star Wars did.
I actually think the first Star Wars made more money, but I don't have that quote on that.
All I know is that Lucas made a lot less money.
Yeah.
And he was banking on making a ton of money because his idea was that he would make these Star Wars movies one every 3 years, and he would use the profits of those movies to fund a bunch of little films. And that didn't work out.
No.
Because he suddenly had all his chips on Star Wars. And so the miserable experience of doing Empire Strikes Back led Lucas to decide he only wanted to make one more Star Wars movie. But we'll get a little more into that.
The first Star Wars made almost 800 million. I don't know if that's with inflation. And then Empire made 538 million, 535, something like that. Which is still a fuckload of money, especially for back then, but
yeah,
a little less.
Well, how much of that, because do they factor the re-releases into that gross?
I don't think so. You know what? They do for everything else now, so you know what? I'll say yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I know if you look at Disney films, they always factor in all the times they re-release the fucking movie.
Yeah, or Avatar.
Yeah.
Where it's $3 billion now. And it's fuck.
Yeah, well, it's just a bunch of pointless scenes that were added to that one. Nothing that Star Wars would ever do.
Ba-dum-bum.
So what do you think about Boba Fett? Let's talk about Boba Fett a little bit.
Okay, because I want to talk about the bounty hunters as a whole, so that's a perfect little thing too. Boba Fett is a cool-looking henchman, and he's like if Shane Black wrote a Star Wars movie, Boba Fett is like a lesser Shane Black character, I think. Mm-hmm. He looks cool. There's an intimidating voice and presence. Even just the way he's in the scene, he's always kind of behind someone else, so he's not the central threat. He's an interesting one, just visually. And I think that's enough. And I also think the character is not much more than that, given what we see here. Yeah. But that's okay. He doesn't need to be. It's the popularity around him that blew up because he has a cool helmet, I think. That really kind of annoys me more than anything else.
Well, the popularity for him blew up because he was like I was saying, he was released as a bonus toy you could get. If you ordered 5 Star Wars toys, you'd get a free Boba Fett. And then they would come with this description of Boba Fett that described how his armor is it's a bunch of trophies kind of stuck together. It's a cobbled together armor. So each one piece tells a different tale. And I think it got a lot of fans really hyped about this character, and then he doesn't do anything in the movie.
In another universe where he was the main villain, and like it did focus on the bounty hunters, that would be a really compelling antagonist. Like, fuck, he's such a badass. He's hunted all these people down. He's just taken parts of them, and he's like literally built by them. That's an interesting idea.
There was talk about him being like a morally gray character. Like, he wasn't going to be totally evil, but he wasn't going to be a good guy either, because, you know, he went wherever the money went.
Mm-hmm.
And part of his inspiration comes from, again, when they sat down to decide they're going to do another Star Wars movie, they realized Darth Vader was like the big deal of the first movie. He's a henchman, basically, in the original Star Wars. And there's this backstory with him and Obi-Wan, but that's about it. And we don't really know much about him other than he killed Luke's father, which, you know, is a traditional kind of story setup, that there's a guy who killed your father. They weren't sure, like, you know, they still didn't totally know what Vader was, like what his motivations were, especially now that he doesn't have, you know, Tarkin kind of just dragging him around everywhere. So there were ideas of maybe he's more like a mercenary type, like he operates off the books of the Empire. But then it was decided, let's just make him, you know, kind of a commander and like a dark knight type character. But they had all these ideas for like a mercenary Darth Vader, so they just took those ideas and started applying them to the Boba Fett character. Boba Fett is kind of like, you know, a weird offspring of Darth Vader. And you can kind of see it. They both have masks. You don't see their face. And they kind of just put unused ideas for Vader onto Boba Fett. But they never explored any of those ideas because he kept getting cut out of the script. Because at some point, Vader and Luke became the key story of Empire Strikes Back. I don't know when it happened, but that's the direction the film ended up going in under Lawrence Kasdan.
It may have worked out for the best, because I really like the lore behind the bounty hunters. Like, there's really interesting story stuff there, potentially. Again, never really explored in any capacity. And in another universe, again, with all the other bounty hunters, like, they don't need to be in this movie.
No.
Like, at all. But like, if this was made like today, there's like 100% a scene where they stop prior to Cloud City at another planet to refuel or something, and then they have all the bounty hunters fight there, like chase them through a marketplace or something, or even just at Cloud City, you know?
Yeah.
But no, they're gone after that.
Yep. They just don't say anything and then leave.
Yep.
Although today, in modern film, they would be there to set up the Sinister Six spin-off film.
Oh my God, you're right. No, this would set up Rogue One.
Yeah.
No.
Hey, so that's how that works.
I don't like that. Never mind. I'm glad. I'm glad this didn't happen at all.
Yes.
Fucking no.
Although I would rather see a movie about these bounty hunters than an Obi-Wan movie, but that's just me. Obi-Wan shows up as a ghost in this movie to give fucking exposition.
Yeah, what do you think about the opening? Because I've noticed this more than on my rewatches than most times. Every Star Wars opens up like in media res. Like, things happen in between the movies. And there's a lot of backstory that doesn't really get fleshed out, but it doesn't need to be. Like, you get all the information you need to tell this particular story.
Well, that's the brilliant thing of these movies, is that they know when, of the first three, I want to say, is that they know what story to tell. Like, they could have gone into all sorts of different stories about, like, oh, how'd the rebels get from Yavin to Hoth, or, you know, what happened when they were on Ord Mantell, and they ran into that bounty hunter. Where did Luke first learn to, you know, make a lightsaber come towards him? It's been 3 years since the last movie. What happened in between then? But those stories aren't that interesting. And we don't need to know them. Like, maybe I wouldn't mind reading about them, maybe, but you don't need them for this movie. You can just imagine that they've been, you know, doing stuff. Prequels have the inverse problem, where they seem to pick all the worst moments to focus on. But we'll get to those. But actually, you know, the opening is like just to show you like some of the messes of this production. They filmed in it was either Iceland or Greenland. I think Greenland has more snow than Iceland. I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
And it's fucking impossible to film in snow. I'm sure you've heard that somewhere. Have you ever been in like a snowy climate?
I have, yes.
Try making a fucking movie in that. Where you can't, the snow can't be disturbed by your crew. You know? Like, you can't fuck up the snow too much. And you have to make sure it looks the same between takes. Oh my God, I can't imagine. I don't know why they filmed it there. But the original opening of this movie was going to be a Womp Attack on the Rebel base. And that's how Luke was going to get injured. Because they wrote in Luke's injury because in between Star Wars and Empire, Mark Hamill got in a big car accident that fucked up his face. That's why he has weird scarring on his face in this movie. So they had to write in an explanation. So they came up with this idea of a Wampa attack. It was originally supposed to attack the whole base and everyone was going to fight him. And there's all these deleted scenes. You can find them online of Wampas, but the Wampas looked fucking terrible. And it never worked right. So they decided to cut that whole attack scene, even though they filmed a substantial portion of it. And they just had one Wampa attack Luke. And even then, they couldn't really show the Wampa because it looked so bad.
In the original edition, you don't see it that much, but in the special edition, they show a lot more of it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it looks terrible. It doesn't look good, but it doesn't look awful.
No, the Wampa in the special edition looks fine. It's the way it's edited into the scene that makes it awkward. It feels like an Ed Wood movie where they filmed two completely different scenes at completely different times. So you have characters that are supposed to be like looking across at each other. But the way the cameras are angled and the way the edits are placed, it just comes across as like really awkward. And at the end of the day, unnecessary. You didn't need that. You didn't need to see the Wampa. Mm-hmm. And also, I have a little bit of a problem with George Lucas making changes to a movie he didn't direct, especially when he's such a big fucking believer in the auteur theory. But you can look up this footage. There's all this deleted Wampa stuff, and it's still out there. But they must have spent a ton of money on this battle, and then they just cut it. And that's a sign of problems to come. George Lucas wasn't on set for most of this movie. It was Gary Kurtz who was kind of put there to be the day-to-day producer. And he ended up rubbing Lucas the wrong way because he was constantly taking Kershner's side in arguments instead of George's. And George would end up parting ways with Gary Kurtz at the end of Empire. And Gary Kurtz, some people look at Gary Kurtz as the guy who, brought the real heart to Star Wars. Like, he had a lot of influence on the first two films. And that Lucas cut him out because Lucas just didn't like him. But I think Lucas did the right thing in firing him because he's supposed to make sure the budget doesn't get out of control, and the budget doubled. I mean, it doesn't matter how smart he is, and that the fact that it did end up making a great movie, he fucked up. You get fired for doing that. Mm-hmm. And part of the problem was Kershner wasn't as good he was a great actor director. And good at emotional human moments, which is what this movie's heavy with. But he didn't really understand special effects very much, so that would always slow things down. And so what would take, a day to shoot would end up taking 3 days to shoot. And that would become a problem eventually, because you're paying a lot of crew members to just stand around.
Yeah, I can see how that's a problem. I mean, a lot of modern directors, I think, kind of, maybe they don't talk about it as much, but there's clearly an issue taking low-range indie directors and plopping them into movies that have $200 million for a budget. Yes. Obviously, Empire had a little bigger budget than $5 million, which is common for an independent film, or $1 million. But still, that's a dangerous game you're playing.
Yeah.
There.
Oh yeah. And it doesn't really work. It only works sometimes these days.
Because I think of a handful.
Exactly. I think of more failures than successes, unfortunately.
I want to go back talking about the character stuff in Empire Strikes Back. Because this is one of the only movies, at least on this scale and popularity, that is really driven by character decisions.
Yes.
You don't see this often. Ever.
Well, this is the one thing every sequel that's tried to be Empire Strikes Back usually misses.
Yes, exactly.
Which is that, there's this stupid thing because like everyone goes, well, the middle chapter of the trilogy has to be the darkest, which is bullshit. That's not true. The third film should probably be have the darkest moment in it when our heroes are at their lowest point. The thing is, the second act is supposed to carry the characters forward and let the characters drive the story. That's what it's got to be. Because if you take the first Star Wars movie, they're all fun characters, but they're not exactly deep characters. Obi-Wan's a little deep. But at the end of the day, Luke's just, a kid. He kind of gets caught up, and now he's on an adventure. Han Solo's the thief with the heart of gold. Chewbacca just roars. And Princess Leia is, she's a little feistier, but she is a damsel in distress at the end of it. And this movie takes all the characters to their logical next step. Which, one, we see Leia. She's actually commanding things in this film. Which for some reason doesn't carry through to Return of the Jedi, but whatever. We start running into the problem of, well, how does Han Solo's conflicting, lifestyle fit within the rebellion? Especially now that he's kind of falling for Princess Leia. And how is Luke going to continue his training now that Obi-Wan's gone? And why is Darth Vader so obsessed with Luke Skywalker?
The one thing I want to point out is that Chewbacca, he's never the deepest character in any of these movies, but he's like a really loyal dog.
Yeah.
And I really like that. He just happens to be like an 8-foot tall dog.
Yep.
Which is just amazing.
Chewbacca is the best. Everyone loves Chewbacca.
Yeah. If you don't like Chewbacca, you're an asshole.
Thank God he's no longer dead. Which only a couple people know what that's about, but we'll get to it. But that's the thing. Your sequel's supposed to be like the characters have to drive your sequel. You can't have just a plot that drives the sequel. You have to come up with a plot that fits around where the characters are going. And a lot of movies today, when they do the sequel, they kind of just come up with a plot that's kind of like intense and then put the characters in that plot. But there's not enough follow through with like how the characters drive it. I mean, I've said a lot about both Age of Ultron and Civil War. One of the big flaws of those movies is that the plot drives the story more than the characters. And I think that's a problem. There's a lot of character stuff in those movies, but the characters aren't driving those movies enough.
I would definitely agree with Civil War. And given how that movie plays out, it feels like they should. There's no reason why they shouldn't have. And I think, because I've kind of really softened on my feelings on that movie. That movie doesn't need a central, like, Marvel villain.
Yeah.
Zemo, who I think is a good villain, just not needed for that movie.
That movie doesn't need a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think Age of Ultron handled it a little better, but I think there was a lot of conflicting forces going on that drove the movie, so it doesn't really gel in the way it should have. But yeah, I mean, that's the problem. Movies, they're more about plots than characters, which is a shame because Marvel's got some great characters.
That's the reason they succeeded. I mean, yeah, for the most part, they make fun, solid movies at the very least most of the time. But their first movies, for the most part, also just really establish good characters that people like spending time with. So why not let them drive the stuff? Like, I've called it out a lot, but like the biggest problem for the MCU, for me, on like their wide scale storytelling, is that everything has revolved around the Infinity Stones. At least the big event stuff, and it never needed to be like that. That's plot stuff. I don't care about plot, Like, everyone's like, "Oh, who's gonna die in Infinity War?" Like, I don't care. Like
that's to bring it back. To bring it back to Empire, we didn't need the story about how Darth Vader found out that Luke was his son. We don't need that whole thing. I think it's been told recently in the comic books, like the moment he found it out, but you don't need that story. We start off with Darth Vader knowing that, and then he's hunting him down.
Yeah, and the retelling in the comic book is a fantastic little moment.
That's from the Darth Vader comic, right?
Yeah, it is awesome. I haven't read that in full, But my friend was like, dude, you got to see this. And he just pulled up those pages on Twitter, and I was just like, whoa. Like, it actually gave me a shaken feeling. That's very well told little comic.
It's actually pretty great. Darth Vader comic, which I was like, I don't want, because Darth Vader's kind of better when he's in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little nervous about it, but it's much better than the main Star Wars comic. So check it out. It's good.
Yeah.
But you don't. But a lot of those stories you don't need. That's fun stuff to find out later. And remember, at the same time, there actually is an ongoing Marvel comic that told the first 5 or 6 issues told the story of A New Hope, and then kept telling the story, and started bringing in all this weird stuff. Jabba the Hutt shows up in the comics, but Jabba the Hutt looks nothing like he would end up looking like in the film. I think he looks like a bit of a walrus type character. Not a fat walrus slug thing, like he's got a walrus face, but he's got a human type body, if I remember correctly.
No, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Not the right kind of weird for that character, but interesting.
It's interesting, but it's also remember that Jabba the Hutt was originally supposed to be a human being.
Oh yeah, how could I forget?
Which fucking George Lucas lies constantly about. Where he's like, I always intended to replace that stand-in with a creature that we would come up with later. Do you think we're fucking dumb, George? George Lucas thinks we're a bunch of idiots. You don't film an entire scene with a stand-in like that. That's rehearsals. It was great though. That version of Jabba the Hutt, he had a Scottish accent.
And he's a remarkable human being.
Yeah, did it? Hey. But one other thing I want to point out, Empire is considered the classic dark turn sequel, where everything goes wrong, which it does. But guess what doesn't happen in this movie?
No one dies.
No one dies.
At least main character. People die.
People die, but none of the main characters die. Han Solo gets put in the carbon freeze, but he doesn't die. And so I want this nonsense to go away that you have to kill characters for drama. There's more drama in this film than any of the other Star Wars films. It's watching them try and deal with things.
Not to say that people can't be killed off, but just doing it for the sake of drama is never a good idea.
Yes.
Ever. It's stupid, and it feels very cheap, especially if you have characters as likable as these.
It's also a move a lot of films do these days because they don't know how to end their movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's they think, well, all right, we have to have this dramatic ending, so how should we end it? And Zack Snyder says, we'll kill Superman. And Warner Bros. Is brilliant.
In terms of plot, Star Wars starts on a small little scale, right, on Tatooine, and blows up into this big space battle, right? You can see the escalation there. Empire Strikes Back de-escalates. It gets smaller in scale as it goes along, which is really cool, down to the point where it opens with a gigantic land battle on the snow, and then closes with a final confrontation in basically large air vents.
Yep.
And it's
between
all
two guys.
Yes, and it feels huge because of everything that's built up to that moment in terms of character and what the story's about, good versus evil.
And when Vader shows up in that room and says, "The Force is with you, young Skywalker," and he's fighting him with one hand for the first couple minutes, that's the shit right there. That scene is amazing. Just looking at it. I just love looking at that room with all the smoke. Just the lightsabers and the smoke.
Oh,
Darth Vader with the cape.
Oh, it's shot beautifully. Who's the cinematographer? Peter Shishitsky?
Good job, Pete.
Yeah. Oh, he's done a lot of work with David Cronenberg, for those who are interested in that sort of thing.
That makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
So there's a brief body horror moment in this film.
Yeah.
We see the back of Vader's head, which is the first indication that he's a man and not a robot.
Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of general audiences were confused on when they saw the movie.
But again, it's just telling you what you need to know for this movie. It lets you know that at the end of the day, he's just another human being. Yeah.
Well, it's also a setup for, what was he before he was this monster?
Mm-hmm.
And we get a little answer to that at the end. Another thing about you talking about a movie going from big to small, This movie's a little bit like, this movie's basically a deconstruction of the last Star Wars movie. Because, that movie ends and everything works out, but then this is a sequel. It's like, nope, shit didn't work out. There's still a lot of problems out there. But one of the big ones is Luke's Copilot in the Battle of Hoth, I think, is like a deconstruction of the Luke Skywalker character before this movie. They're going to take off Dak. His Copilot is like, I feel like I can take on the whole Empire myself, which is how Luke feels a lot in the first Star Wars movie. And he does. He destroys the Death Star, especially because he trusted his feelings. Dak makes it about 30 seconds into the battle and gets shot in the face, which is what happens to most people in war. Yeah. You're not a big hero. Luke doesn't get to do too much heroic shit. He destroys the one walker, but that's about it.
Yeah, and they lose. I think that sets up a big thing for this movie. From the beginning, they lose. And with the exception of Luke Skywalker, our main characters are on the run for the entirety of this movie, and it just doesn't let up. Everywhere they go, there is something wrong. They come across something or someone who's out to get them, and it never stops. And that's a great way to keep up pacing while Luke is off on Dagobah, just like training the whole time.
You know what the most brilliant touch to this movie is? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. How it's not boring?
Well, but the fact that the Millennium Falcon is all busted. That is a great... Whoever came up with that is fucking brilliant. Because that's a great way to keep our characters as being underdogs. Like they're scrambling for resources and just getting the fucking ship to work. So, I mean... That's something that happens in a lot of like sci-fi shows. Like the main characters are like, you think of something like Firefly, like they're just they're going from job to job, just trying to survive in their tiny spaceship. That's one of the things I really like about those type of shows, and what I like about this movie. Unfortunately, the Millennium Falcon kind of became like such an awesome thing that now when it shows up in movies, it does awesome things instead of is actually a hindrance to our character's success. I was going to say, I want the Millennium Falcon to blow up in one of the next two movies.
I was convinced it was going to blow up in The Force Awakens. That was my big thing for that movie. I was like, okay, Han Solo's going to come back, and he's definitely going to die because of Harrison Ford's comments years ago. And they're going to crash the Millennium Falcon to, like, give people a chance to escape or something. And it didn't happen. That would
have been interesting.
Yeah, that didn't happen. And I actually kind of prefer what went down. But, the Millennium Falcon needs to blow up. But anyways.
Well, if you follow the Star Trek model, first you kill Spock, and then you blow up the Enterprise. So.
Okay, sure. I like that. Also, the Millennium Falcon falling apart and like being just a giant piece of junk, it shows how good of a pilot Han Solo is. Because even after everything goes wrong, he's still like figuring out little maneuvers to go to, like, he can't jump to light speed, but he still manages to crash to Imperial starships into one another. Ship battles in science fiction, they always take place on like an X to Y axis sort of thing, right? With the exception of Revenge of the Sith and The Empire Strikes Back. Now, hear me out. The ships maneuver through space like freely, like up, down, diagonally across. Like it's not like fighting on water.
Yeah.
On battles, the space is open and you can basically do anything up there. And these are really the only two movies that take advantage of that. And that's kind of badass.
The space battle, the dogfights in this are pretty amazing. Big step up from the last movie, which only had like one dogfight in space and then the Death Star battle. All right, let's get to Yoda.
Oh, yeah.
War does not make one great. That's one of the things Yoda says. Remember, like, Luke is like, I'm looking for a great warrior. Yeah, the whole thing is about you think you're going to meet like this great warrior, and then you meet this little guy, and he's the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy.
Which I think is another reason why this movie is just so fucking genius. It's not just that it plays against expectations; it's that those play against your expectations work for the story that they're telling here. Not just short term for this movie, but for Luke's arc over the course of a trilogy now. Even though it wasn't intended as such.
Yeah. They kind of fuck up the Yoda stuff in the next movie, but there's a lot of... I mean, every scene with Yoda in this is great. From the first, faking him out by pretending he's not Yoda. which totally doesn't work today because kids know who Yoda is before they see the fucking movie.
Yeah.
Especially if you're one of those idiots who shows your kids the prequels first. Hopefully there aren't too many of those people out there.
I can't imagine people doing that. I definitely haven't recommended my friend to do that.
That's the worst thing you could possibly recommend someone to do.
It's okay, we don't talk anymore.
There's a reason why that happened. And you should feel guilty about it. But
well, to be fair, they knew about the Vader and Yoda stuff just because pop culture has like plastered them on every facet of the galaxy.
It's hard to keep that a secret from kids. I'm just thinking of this. The thing I noticed watching it this time was just how much emotion they got out of that fucking puppet.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy that they got it to work so well that you totally buy it. And I don't know what happened between these movies and because Phantom Menace they still used the puppet Yoda and it looked terrible. I don't know what the fuck happened there.
Yeah, and there's this really distinct thing with the puppet where Twitter pal Andrew Boyd Allen, shout out to him. He's very pro special effects in the sense that just use CGI or practical stuff wherever the need be. Like they both have their merits, right? And like how the original Yoda, it's not that it looks realistic, it's that it works for all the scenes and it can emote properly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Little Shop of Horrors, the plant in Little Shop of Horrors, it doesn't exactly look quote unquote realistic, but it's a fucking musical and it looks like it's actually singing, which is insane. You just got to get people to buy into what you're selling.
You got to sell it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there is still there's always a little. You got to be careful because there's a moment where it could go a little the wrong way, you know, with the effect. I mean, because if Yoda didn't work, the whole fucking movie falls apart. It's a pretty daring move to hinge so much of the film on that.
I think there's a definitive Star Wars moment in what the Force is about. These discussions of like something that's so potent in the universe, something that guides and drives everyone, whether they realize it or not. You know, where it's very similar to concepts of religion and you know, like faith, even if a faith without religion. You know, just that is really powerful stuff. I think to sell to kids and people of all ages, basically, this higher power. It's not a singular force; it's an all-being force. And the way Yoda talks about it, and what Luke is learning and fails to learn by the end of this movie. Although I think there's like a gray area there because, like, what would you have done? You know, that really makes it for some really interesting mythology, and it really enriches the world because it really is a deconstruction of the first Star Wars, and like he can't win just by hitting someone harder or blowing someone up. He ends up winning in Return of the Jedi for being basically just an empathetic human being, which says a lot, I think, about the types of stories that stick with us and maybe that we need more often than we don't.
That's great. It's all great shit. And that scene in particular, when he gives the speech about what his ally being the Force, is when he lifts, you know, the X-wing out of the swamp, which is probably one of the most iconic shots in this series. And it's where, you know, the John Williams score really gets to swell.
Oh fuck yeah! It's one of the best moments like in movie history, I'd say.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, this movie's chock full of great moments. I mean, the whole ending with Vader is just incredible on that big set. And like, I mean, you can look at behind the scenes photos to see how they, you know, it's all sorts of, you know, psychological stuff, and they're only like a couple feet off the ground, but that doesn't matter. You see it in the movie, it looks fucking massive. But this is the movie again. This totally changes the direction of Star Wars. Because the first Star Wars is really this swashbuckling type of adventure. It's a mishmash of like tons of different genres, all repackaged in kind of a space opera type story. You know, it's a Western, it's a war movie, it's a film about a castle in the form of the Death Star. It's a film about wizards in the form of Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. It's a film about rescuing the princess. It's a film about monsters. There's all sorts of monsters in it. You know, it's a movie about, you know, little robots. And it's all sorts of things thrown into one movie. and it follows a very traditional hero's journey path. But this is the movie that goes, all right, now Star Wars isn't just one little story. It's not just a series of adventures. It's this epic that stretches from before we started following the story and after. That's what the episode, that's, you know, this is episode 5, and this is the first film you would see until you saw Star Wars re-released, where, you know, it says episode 5 at the beginning. You're like, well, what happened to the other 3 or 4? And in the moment when Darth Vader says, I am your father, you realize we're in the middle of a much bigger story than we imagined. And that changes Star Wars for both better and worse. And it becomes a problem when you try and finish everything in one movie after it.
Without getting too far into that, why do you think that is?
Well, because the next film tries to be both Star Wars and Empire at the same time. We'll get more into that when we talk about Return of the Jedi, which I'm criticizing it now, but I want to say I love Jedi. I'm not like a Jedi hater. I'm not one of those people that's like, there's only 2 good Star Wars movies. I'm not that guy. It's just that Return of the Jedi is got a lot of great parts that are kind of lumped together a little awkwardly. And part of that is because of how Empire set up that this is now a grand epic, and it needs a grand epic conclusion, but we also need these other stories going on. The whole thing gets complicated, is what I'm saying. But like I say, the Star Wars saga isn't a saga without Empire Strikes Back. Star Wars is just an adventure movie. But once you throw Empire into the mix, the whole thing grows.
I think there's an element that gets added to a lot of sequels too, which you happily criticized on our Age of Ultron discussion way back when. Sometimes they add romances to ongoing franchises with vastly different characters. Sometimes it works to comedic effect, sometimes it doesn't, and then sometimes you just hit it right in the sweet spot, and you get something like a love story for the ages, a sweeping romance to accompany a grand adventure. And I really think that's what Han Solo and Princess Leia are.
Here's the most important question. Did they fuck before this movie? There's a lot of unspokenness. There was a drunken night, and they were both too afraid to talk about it afterwards. They weren't sure how the other really felt about them.
And so they're a little hostile from the start of the movie.
Yep.
And it's only when they're all by themselves, they have nothing else, they have to confront each other.
Well, because I think a lot of people, like people who don't understand film sometimes, they kind of try and like lump in the Han Solo, Princess Leia kind of romance as being like, you know, one of those bullshit where like the guy is always like kind of, you know, chiding the girl and the girl just puts up with his bullshit. But every scene with them is all about how there's been all these unspoken moments with them leading up to this. And they both want to say it, but neither is willing to. Culminating in one of the greatest, you know, lines ever. Princess Leia goes, I love you. And Han Solo says, I know. Because they both know. He's not just saying it for him. Saying it for both of them. And from the beginning of this movie, you know they love each other. Them falling in love happened in between this movie. They just don't want to say it to each other. Because they both think that they are on different paths.
They could have been if the Battle of Hoth hadn't happened.
Yeah.
You know, like this is a fictional universe and only happens the way it's written, right? But it's really driven by the characters in it. And another version of this fictional universe, where Han Solo goes away, I think you end up with a vastly different sequel, obviously, but also a more boring one, where the only resolution would be like him to come sweep in and save the day again, like at the end of the first movie. But that's not nearly as exciting as watching people deal with their feelings. And I think at the end of the day, that's what Empire is so fucking good at. It's just a bunch of people like working out their feelings with each other, for each other, and where they really belong. With
each other and with themselves. It's a lot of internal shit happening. And I mean, the most important relationship in this movie is Luke's relationship to Darth Vader, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's wrong. Luke thinks that Darth Vader is his enemy. entirely. He thinks Darth Vader killed his father. And he finds out that Darth Vader is his father, which he wasn't ready for. Mostly because people have been lying to him, but, you know, I think there's a point with, you know, maybe Yoda was trying to knock some sense into it, being like, hey, if you have patience, maybe think about it a little bit, you might be able to put these pieces together on your own. And by the time you're able to put those pieces together on your own, then you'll be ready to face him. But Luke didn't want to do that. He rushed into it. And that's why he loses in this movie. I mean, by the end of this movie, he is begging for Obi-Wan to help him. Because remember, Obi-Wan was with him when he destroyed the Death Star, but Obi-Wan wasn't with him when he faced Vader. Mm-hmm. Obi-Wan basically abandoned him. I mean, not like in a horrible way, but Obi-Wan couldn't do anything. And Luke thought, you know, he would always have Obi-Wan there to help him, but he didn't. Luke didn't have anyone helping him.
Yeah, and then when he's on the Millennium Falcon, just like broken, defeated, handless now, without a hand.
Yeah.
He just kind of like looks up at the sky or into space and he's asking like, why? Like, why didn't you tell me? And he's just, it's really tragic. I mean, no one really like talks about like crying at a Star Wars movie in the same way you do it like a Greek tragedy or anything like that, right? Like a really like heavy drama, but like that. This is filled with some really heavy moments.
Mm-hmm. Well, I cry at the ending of Babe every time I see it, so I'm a little. I cry at Star Wars sometimes.
Well, that's fair. I mean,
a very specific moment in the next film, which we will get to.
The platonic relationships in this movie, they're just so important for fleshing these people out, and there's a sense of romanticism to it all. It's heavily indebted to John Williams' score, which is just, I don't know if it gets better and better every time, but sure as shit doesn't get any worse.
It's getting better because they don't make film scores like that anymore.
I meant individually through the movies, but that works too. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Well,
I think it's an element that we haven't seen the outcome yet, but could easily be lost on future Star Wars movies. I guess it was kind of not lost, but it just wasn't present for Rogue One. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really needed.
That's the one thing I think Rogue One dropped the ball on, personally. If you remember my review, I think they could have had a lot of emotion going on in that movie that they didn't take advantage of.
Yes.
And there's not a ton there's some in Force Awakens, but Force Awakens is kind of setting up a whole new story, so you don't need it like at the beginning. Yeah. Just need to have that potential energy, which hopefully we'll get some follow-up on in the next film.
I would be shocked if Rian Johnson didn't bring that, because that guy's talented as fuck.
He is, but it's just, you never know.
No, that's true. You never know until you know.
Star Wars has hurt me a lot, so don't never get my hopes up, even if it looks like everything is going in the right direction. Because then you end up like Luke at the end of this movie, fucking dangling. Do you think other Cloud Cities were upset that Cloud City got to call itself Cloud City? There's got to be other ones out there.
I'm sure they must run into that problem, like in every science fiction world. Like, this is called Styx or something. This is called
the Moon. Mm. What do you mean the Moon?
Moons. Yeah.
No, this is the Moon. Yeah. There's a lot of moons. Which one is it? The Moon.
Science fiction doesn't have to worry about that because they're worried about who their other hope is. That was my segue into Yoda's little. No, there is another.
Which is the one hint that Luke has a sister, and the inclusion of that one line is what fucks up Return of the Jedi a little bit. But hey, this movie does introduce something that becomes very problematic for later Star Wars movies, which is that like your Force powers are inherited. In the last movie, Luke was just a random kid who was able to use the Force because he believed in it, showing that anyone can use the Force if they have the right will. But this movie goes, no, your dad was a Jedi, so that's why you're a Jedi.
Kind of does, but I never got the full sense that it was only inherited like genetically.
Well, not in this movie. The prequels really double down on like genetics and how the role they play, and even the new one kind of plays up on that with the whole Kylo Ren stuff. And in the expanded universe, it's a big part of it. I
Oh
think that's
yeah,
a problem. I think that was one of the reasons why the expanded universe wasn't super great at times.
at times. So we'll talk about that for sure.
Yeah.
At times,
Yeah.
this guy. There were a lot of changes, obviously, to the special edition versions of this, or to the original trilogy. I think Empire is the one where I don't see any as like detrimental, at least not off the top of my head. Nothing I wrote down. But what I do like I actively think is a cool idea that they implemented, more windows in Cloud City. I think that just visually that really makes it feel like a more lived-in place. And I don't really like any of the other changes in the series, but I like that one a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, but I don't know. I have the original cuts, and there's something about the way Cloud City looks, like, you know, the way it is, that is fine for me. I mean, I didn't need to be seeing outside constantly. And just all those effects, like, they just kind of, I can't help it. They kind of have those like prequel stink to them, where the prequels always have like a million things happening in the background of every shot, and just like it's just unnecessary. It's all right a little bit. I kind of like, you know, that you open it up and make it like Cloud City truly in the clouds. But there was a look to the original version that worked fine on its own. Yeah. I think the only person that was annoyed about the lack of actual openings was George Lucas. It's not like fans were criticizing it, but
did it change anything that fans were like clamoring for?
Well, I mean, he put the big at the time, everyone was really excited to see the deleted, you know, Han Solo Jabba the Hutt scene, because it was just, you know, it was a deleted scene. But no one really cares for that now. And the special edition of A New Hope, they actually have a scene where Luke and Biggs kind of talk before going to the Death Star battle, which doesn't happen in the original cut.
Dax, his partner in the Hoth battle, you know, gets killed off like unceremoniously. I feel like that's the type of story that Lucas wanted to tell. Like, you know, it's a fun adventure, but, you know, people die in war, and it's sad. And so you have this friend, Biggs, that it's implied Luke grew up with on Tatooine, and then he goes off and joins the rebellion. And then, oh, look, they're like, we're buddy-buddy, we're going to go face off, like, the Empire together. Like, you know, they feel like they could take on the Empire themselves. And then he ends up dying. And that could have been like a huge moment. The movie didn't need it by that point already. You already get the stakes. They could have added a little bit more maybe, but I just think that that's a cool little thread that could have been in there at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something Lucas wanted to do with these movies, because I mean, have you seen American Graffiti?
Yeah.
And like, you know, at like the very end, they just like the epilogue just casually mentions that the comic relief nerd character went missing in action in Vietnam. I mean, that's Lucas was, and the first Star Wars is based on the Vietnam War, so I think that is Lucas's commentary on, you know, war. It's hard to do that when your movie's about how exciting war is. It's a little bit of a contradiction.
I don't think it's inherently like pro-war or anything, though, you know?
No, but some people credit these movies with changing the national sentiment, and that, like, they kind of blame it for, like, the rise of Reagan in the 80s, because it's more like rah-rah, you know, let's all kick ass against obviously evil people, and which flew in the face of a lot of the moral ambiguity of the 70s and their films. And even though, like, you know, these characters are more complicated than just all good, all bad, but there still is a very clear line between good and evil in all these movies.
Yeah, I think the best example of something like a morally great character is Lando Calrissian, of course. You know, like, he's kind of like Han in his own way, trying to get by. He's put between like a rock and a hard place. A rock being the Empire, of course.
And he doesn't know the mess that Han Solo's gotten him in this time, you know?
Yeah, like there's this old interview where I think it was like on Good Morning America or something like that back in the day. The actor's talking about the movie, and the person interviewing him says like, oh, you know, he's playing like a really despicable villain. And it's like, whoa, what? No, he's not. He's clearly like a conflicted guy. He's got a lot going on. I don't understand where that even came from. It's such a weird thing to say.
No, but yeah, that is fucking weird to be like, because he's not all evil. I mean, that whole scene's all about like how clearly Han Solo did something to upset Lando, and they're not getting along too well. Maybe it was taking the Falcon, which I'm sure the Han Solo film will not let us forget. Yeah, it's just, but Lando, once he sees the full scope of the things, he changes sides pretty quickly, faster than the current sitting U.S. president would, apparently.
No one in the administration's a Lando. A fucking Tarkin.
The destruction of Alderaan was horrible, but there's violence on both sides. See, I'm fine with the regular rebellion, but this alt rebellion stuff is just...
It's just too much.
Yeah, alt Imperials. They basically believe everything the Empire does, but they have a different name for it, and they're young guys.
They're not really Imperials. Their ideals just align.
They just overlap with Imperials 99%.
Can you think of any sequels that have actually... They've gone the Empire route, but have done it correctly in terms of like characters driving the narrative instead of plot or just getting darker?
Well, there's the one that came before this, which is Godfather Part 2, which is probably the ultimate example of a great sequel. After this, I would say maybe like Spider-Man 2 comes pretty close, which, opens with Peter getting fired from his job because he's Spider-Man.
Yeah, it does the same thing where he just keeps losing. Like he doesn't. Yeah, even when he wins at the end, like again, the villain dies, and that's not something that he's ever going to be okay with.
And I mean, he should have been fired by J. Jonah Jameson at the beginning of the next movie or sometime in between, but for some reason they forgot to do that, I guess.
Oh, there's a couple problems with Spider-Man 3, though. So
yeah, I mean that's the problem. We have all these. There's a lot of great sequels out there, then the third one fucks it all up. And even when the third one's good, it's just they drop the ball. Like, a lot of people talk about how Godfather 3 is an alright movie, but what is set up in Godfather 2? Godfather 3 should have been, like, epic, and they didn't do it, so... Which is mystifying. And then you got Return of the Jedi, which has to wrap up a lot of different storylines and make a lot of money and not go over budget.
I think it's also just another thing important to mention. You can still care about something and also be like, but this doesn't really work out. Not that someone could do it better, per se, just like, look at how this played out, opposed to how maybe it should have, given what was set up prior to that. Yeah,
you can criticize a movie and still like it. But also don't be one of those dicks who, like, has to find something critical about every movie. Which I also do not like.
And don't use it under the guise of satire or jokes.
Yeah.
When you're not being fucking funny or smart. And you're clearly just trying to be like a pretentious asshole and being...
Yeah, take that, Siskel and Ebert at the movies.
This was clearly directed at CinemaSins, but thank you.
Who?
Okay, the one sequel that I actually did want to mention before I start closing off. I think the closest in terms of a character-driven narrative for a big-budget movie is
If you say Age of Ultron, I will fucking hit you.
Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. There's almost no plot, like, in the traditional sense to that movie. It's just a bunch of people going about their own way, fucking things up for about an hour, and then coming together at the end and learning how to cry together.
Yeah. Although Guardians 2 makes it very clear that, like, the sequels are going to be kind of episodic, like very self-contained adventures. Very little crossing over between each film.
Yeah, that's the one difference, is that it's not setting up like a grand space epic, but in terms of the character-driven stuff, I really can't think of another one that carries the legacy the same way. Yeah,
I guess that makes sense. I liked Guardians 2 very much, but a lot of people seem to shit on it.
Well, that's only because they're dumb, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah. All you have to do is read their points on it, and you go, yeah, and then see that they also gave Batman v Superman a positive review, and then you're like, why am I even listening to this person?
Oh, Matt.
Fuck everyone.
I think that pretty much covers it for The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, it's a shame I'm in like a really bad mood today, so I didn't get to be like, oh, Empire, it's so great when this happens, and it's so great when that happens. It's a little hard to actually be super excited about Star Wars given the current climate of the world. Yeah, it's a terrible climate where it looks like Lucasfilm might not know what they're doing with Star Wars. Other than that, the rest of the world is fine.
Sure.
The fucking life doesn't matter. One day the universe is gonna fucking implode and there will be no more Star Wars. And one day you're gonna die and everything that is you will shut off in your brain. And you won't retain any memory or awareness of what's around you. Have a good night.
Matt, where can the people find you?
At EmperorOTN on Twitter.com.
Hey, you can find me on Twitter.com at DEWGO Waffles.
Uplifting shit like that. Just follow me on
the rest
Twitter.
of the Waffle Press stuff. Like, subscribe if you haven't. If you haven't, if you didn't like this, like, subscribe anyways, because you might find something you do like. AudienceEverywhere.net, Real Film Chatter, etc., etc. Thanks for listening. We have been professionally unprofessional.
A big, new, sprawling space adventure in the Star Wars saga, The Empire Strikes Back. Coming to your galaxy next summer.
Thanks for listening to our darker sequel.
But it's character driven.